Welcome. Let us take a moment to settle in, to quiet the world around us, and to let our minds drift away from the concerns of the present day. We are about to embark on a long and peaceful journey, a slow exploration of a world that existed long before the first human voice ever echoed in a valley, a world ruled not by giant reptiles, but by a force even more powerful and profound: ice. This is the story of the great ice ages, a story of a planet in the grip of a deep and cyclical winter, a story of the incredible forces that shape our world and of the resilient life that learned to endure within it. To understand this frozen past, we must first understand the very nature of an ice age itself, a concept of a scale and duration that stretches far beyond our own human experience. An ice age is a long-term reduction in the temperature of the Earth's surface and atmosphere, resulting in the presence or expansion of continental and polar ice sheets and alpine glaciers. It is a fundamental shift in the planet's climatic state, a prolonged period that can last for millions of years. This is a crucial distinction from the familiar cycle of the seasons. A winter is a brief, predictable, and regional event, a temporary cooling driven by the tilt of the Earth's axis as our hemisphere leans away from the sun. An ice age, in contrast, is a global phenomenon, a deep and enduring cold that fundamentally reshapes the entire planet's geography, its oceans, its atmosphere, and its biosphere. Within a larger ice age, there are rhythmic pulses of extreme cold, known as glacial periods, where the great ice sheets advance, and warmer, shorter periods, known as interglacials, where the ice sheets retreat. These cycles are the great, slow heartbeat of a planet in its frozen state. The most recent of these great ice ages, and the one in which we are technically still living, is the Quaternary glaciation. Its story begins approximately 2.58 million years ago. It was at this point that the long, slow cooling trend that had defined the latter half of the Cenozoic era finally crossed a critical threshold, and large, permanent ice sheets began to form in the northern hemisphere for the first time. This marked the beginning of the Pleistocene epoch, the great age of ice. For the last 2.5 million years, our planet has been in this state of climatic oscillation, its northern lands periodically buried under colossal sheets of ice, and then briefly liberated during the warmer interglacial spells. The most recent of these great glacial periods, the one that most profoundly shaped the world we know today and the evolution of our own species, reached its peak around 20,000 years ago. This was the last glacial maximum. It was a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us. Immense continental ice sheets, in some places over 3 kilometers thick, covered vast portions of the globe. The Laurentide ice sheet smothered all of what is now Canada and stretched south into the United States as far as New York City and the Ohio River. The Cordilleran ice sheet covered the great mountain ranges of the North American West, and in Europe, the Scandinavian ice sheet buried the British Isles, Scandinavia, and northern Germany under a colossal dome of ice. So much of the world's fresh water was locked up in these immense glaciers that global sea levels were over 120 meters or 400 feet lower than they are today, creating vast new coastal plains and land bridges that connected continents. The world beyond the ice was a cold, dry, and windswept place, a vast, treeless biome known as the Mammoth Steppe, which stretched from the shores of the Atlantic in France, all the way across Eurasia, and over the vast exposed land bridge of Beringia into North America. The great and enduring question is, what drives this colossal planetary rhythm? What is the engine that pushes our world into these long periods of profound cold, and then, just as surely, pulls it back out into the warmth of an interglacial? The answer, we have discovered, lies not on the Earth itself, but in the slow, patient, and predictable dance of our planet as it moves through space. The fundamental pacemaker of the ice ages is a series of subtle, overlapping, and cyclical variations in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. These are known as the Milankovitch cycles. These cycles are composed of 3 distinct and independent celestial motions. The first of these is eccentricity. This is the measure of the shape of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. This shape is not a perfect circle, and it varies over time, from being nearly circular to being slightly more elliptical, or oval-shaped. This cycle, from more circular to more elliptical, and back again, takes a very long time, with a dominant period of around 100,000 years. When the orbit is more elliptical, the Earth's distance from the Sun varies more throughout the year, and this changes the total amount of solar energy our planet receives. While this change is small, it has a subtle but persistent effect on the long-term energy balance of the planet. The second of these great cycles is axial tilt, or obliquity. This is the angle of the Earth's rotational axis relative to its orbital plane. It is this tilt that gives us our seasons. Today, that tilt is about 23.5 degrees, but it is not constant. Over a period of approximately 41,000 years, the Earth's axis slowly rocks back and forth from a minimum tilt of about 22.1 degrees to a maximum of about 24.5 degrees. When the tilt is greater, the seasons are more extreme. The summers are hotter and the winters are colder. When the tilt is smaller, the seasons are milder, with cooler summers and less severe winters. This cycle has a profound effect on the polar regions. The key to building a great ice sheet is not a brutally cold winter, but a cool summer. If the summers are cool enough that the snow that falls in the winter does not completely melt away, then year after year, the snow will accumulate, compacting into ice and forming a glacier. It is the cycle of axial tilt that is one of the primary drivers of these cool northern summers. The third and final of these orbital rhythms is precession. This is the slow, conical wobble of the Earth's rotational axis, much like the wobble of a spinning top. This cycle takes about 23,000 years to complete, and it determines the timing of the seasons relative to the Earth's orbit. Specifically, it determines whether a hemisphere's summer occurs when the Earth is closest to the Sun at perihelion, making it hotter, or when it is farthest from the Sun at aphelion, making it cooler. Once again, this affects the severity of the seasons and plays a crucial role in determining whether the snows of a northern winter will survive the subsequent summer. These three great, slow, and overlapping cycles, eccentricity, axial tilt, and precession, work together like a grand, celestial symphony. They do not change the total amount of sunlight the Earth receives by a great deal. What they do, with a powerful and predictable rhythm, is change the geographical and seasonal distribution of that sunlight. When these three cycles align in a particular way, they can conspire to create a long period of many thousands of years of unusually cool summers across the great landmasses of the northern hemisphere. And it is during these periods that the great ice ages are born. The snow begins to accumulate, the glaciers begin to grow, and the planet begins its long, slow descent into a deep and profound freeze. But these subtle orbital variations are not powerful enough on their own to cause such dramatic climate swings. They are merely the pacemaker, the gentle, cosmic nudge that sets a much more powerful system in motion. We must now explore the feedback mechanisms within the Earth's own systems, in the atmosphere, in the oceans, and on the land itself, that amplify these gentle cosmic nudges into the profound planet-altering shifts of a full-blown ice age. We have now explored the great celestial clockwork that governs the deep rhythms of our planet's climate. The subtle, overlapping cycles of the Earth's orbit around the Sun, the Milankovitch cycles, act as a grand and patient pacemaker, determining when and where the Sun's energy falls upon our world. But these gentle, cosmic nudges, these small variations in solar radiation, are not on their own nearly powerful enough to plunge the entire planet into a deep freeze or to pull it back out again. They are merely the initial trigger, the first small stone that starts a great and powerful avalanche. The true and immense power of the ice ages comes from a series of profound feedback mechanisms within the Earth's own systems, in the atmosphere, in the oceans, and on the land itself. These are the great amplifiers, the processes that take a small initial cooling and magnify it again and again until colossal sheets of ice have once more claimed the northern continents. The first, and perhaps the most powerful, of these amplifiers is a simple and elegant process known as the ice albedo feedback. Albedo is a measure of the reflectivity of a surface. A dark surface, like the deep blue of the open ocean, or the dark green of a dense forest, has a low albedo. It absorbs a great deal of the sun's energy and converts it into heat. A bright, white surface, like fresh snow or clean glacial ice, has a very high albedo. It reflects a huge portion of the sun's energy directly back into space. The ice albedo feedback is a runaway loop driven by this simple principle. It begins when the Milankovitch cycles create a period of unusually cool summers in the northern hemisphere. During these cool summers, not all of the snow that fell during the previous winter melts away. A few, small, persistent patches of white snow remain, year-round, in the highlands of places like Scandinavia and northern Canada. These small patches of snow, though seemingly insignificant, have a powerful local effect. They reflect more sunlight than the dark tundra or forest that they cover, which cools the ground beneath and around them. The next winter, more snow falls, and the next summer, because the ground is already colder, an even larger patch of snow survives the melt. This larger patch of white then reflects even more sunlight, which cools an even larger area, which allows an even greater expanse of snow to persist the following year. This is the beginning of the runaway loop. Over thousands of years, this process continues and accelerates. The small, persistent snow patches grow and compact into alpine glaciers. These glaciers then begin to flow down from the mountains, merging in the lowlands to form great ice caps. These ice caps, now covering thousands of square kilometers, have a profound effect on the regional climate, reflecting so much solar energy that the entire continent begins to cool. Eventually, these ice caps coalesce into a single colossal continent-spanning ice sheet. With each step of its growth, the ice sheet's reflective power increases, amplifying the initial cooling and pushing the planet deeper and deeper into a glacial state. This single, simple feedback loop is one of the primary engines of an ice age. The second great amplifier is found in the very air itself. The Earth's atmosphere contains a delicate balance of greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide and methane, which act as a thermal blanket, trapping heat and keeping the planet warm. But the concentration of these gases is not constant. It changes in response to the planet's temperature in another powerful feedback loop. The world's oceans are a vast reservoir of dissolved carbon dioxide, but the laws of chemistry dictate that cold water can hold more dissolved gas than warm water. As the Milankovitch cycles initiate a period of global cooling, the oceans begin to cool as well, and as they cool, they begin to draw down vast quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, absorbing it into the cold, deep waters. This reduction in atmospheric carbon dioxide weakens the planet's greenhouse effect, which causes the planet to cool even further, which in turn allows the oceans to absorb even more carbon dioxide. This is another powerful, self-reinforcing feedback loop that pushes the planet deeper into its icy state. The biological world also plays a part. As the great ice sheets expand, they bury vast forests and soils, locking away the carbon they contain. And as the world cools, the biological productivity of the land and the sea changes, further altering the great planetary cycle of carbon. The third great amplifier is found in the immense and powerful circulation of the world's oceans, a great global network of currents, often called the thermohaline circulation, or the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, transports enormous quantities of heat around the planet. Warm surface waters flow from the equator towards the poles, releasing their heat into the atmosphere and warming the high latitudes. As this water cools and becomes saltier, it grows denser and sinks into the deep ocean, eventually flowing back towards the equator to begin the cycle anew. But this great conveyor belt is a sensitive one. As the great ice sheets of the northern hemisphere begin to melt during a warming phase, they can release enormous torrents of cold, fresh water into the North Atlantic. This sudden influx of fresh water can act like a switch, disrupting or even completely shutting down the ocean conveyor belt. With the transport of warm water from the tropics cut off, the northern hemisphere, particularly Europe, can be plunged back into a sudden and deep freeze, an event known as a younger Dryas, even as the rest of the world is beginning to warm. This complex and sometimes chaotic dance between the ice, the oceans, and the atmosphere, is another of the great engines of the Ice Age cycles. It is this combination of the slow, patient, cosmic rhythm of the Milankovitch cycles and these powerful, internal, amplifying feedbacks of ice albedo, greenhouse gases, and ocean currents that creates the profound and dramatic climatic swings of a full-blown ice age. And it was in the world, created by these great forces, that the magnificent and iconic beasts of the Pleistocene, the megafauna, rose to prominence. The vast, cold, and dry biome of the mammoth steppe was not a barren wasteland. It was a rich and productive grassland, a sea of hardy grasses, sedges, and herbs that could thrive in the cold, dry conditions. And it was this grassland that supported some of the largest and most spectacular mammals of all time. The most famous of these, the very symbol of the Ice Age, was the woolly mammoth. This was a magnificent creature, a true giant of the steppe. It stood as tall as a modern African elephant, but it was far more robustly built. Its body was covered in a thick, shaggy coat of long dark hair, with a dense, woolly undercoat for insulation. It had a thick layer of fat beneath its skin, small fur-lined ears to prevent heat loss, and a high, domed head. Its most spectacular feature was its pair of immense, curving tusks, which could grow up to 5 meters or 16 feet in length. These tusks were not just for display. They were essential tools used to sweep aside the deep snow of the long winters to expose the frozen grasses beneath. They lived in large matriarchal family groups, their great, slow, and ponderous herds a constant and defining presence on the vast windswept plains. Alongside them lived the woolly rhinoceros, a solitary and powerful grazer, its body also covered in a thick, shaggy coat, and its head adorned with a huge, flattened, keratinous horn, which it used as a snowplow. And there were the great herds of steppe bison, and the wild horses and reindeer, all adapted to a life of constant grazing and constant vigilance in the great, open expanse of the frozen world. And where there were great herds of herbivores, there were also great predators. The apex predators of the mammoth steppe were the great cave lions of Eurasia, the largest lions of all time, and the formidable saber-toothed cats, like Smilodon in the Americas, a powerful ambush hunter that used its immense canine teeth to bring down the largest of prey. It was a world of giants, a world of incredible power and resilience, a world perfectly and beautifully adapted to the deep and profound cold of the glacial maximum. We have now explored the great celestial clockwork that governs the deep rhythms of our planet's climate and the powerful internal feedback mechanisms of ice, ocean, and air that amplify these cosmic nudges into the profound, planet-altering swings of a full-blown ice age. We have walked, in our minds, across the vast, cold, and windswept plains of the mammoth steppe, and we have stood in the shadow of the great and magnificent beasts that were the masters of this frozen world. But now, we must turn our attention to a different kind of creature, a creature without the thick, shaggy coat of a mammoth, without the great saber-like teeth of a Smilodon, and without the immense, brute power of a woolly rhino. We must now begin the long, slow, and patient story of our own ancestors, and explore the great and enduring question of how this small, fragile, and seemingly insignificant bipedal ape not only survived in this formidable world of ice and of giants, but was ultimately forged by it into the creature that would one day inherit the earth. The story of human evolution during the great ice ages is not a simple linear progression. It is a story of immense environmental pressure, of constant challenge, and of remarkable and often surprising adaptation. As the long, stable warmth of the Miocene gave way to the cooler, drier, and more seasonal world of the Pliocene, the great, global forests of Africa began to shrink and fragment. In their place, the open woodlands and vast, grassy savannas spread, creating a new and dangerous world. For our most ancient, tree-dwelling primate ancestors, this was a profound crisis. Their world, the world of the canopy, was disappearing. They were faced with a stark and unforgiving choice: adapt to this new open landscape or vanish forever. It was in this crucible of environmental change that the first great step on the road to becoming human was taken. The ancestors of our lineage began to venture out from the shrinking forests and onto the open savanna, and in doing so, they evolved a revolutionary new way of moving. They began to walk upright, on two legs. This was the dawn of bipedalism. For millions of years, this new and unique lineage of bipedal apes, the Australopithecines, or southern apes, flourished in the savannas of eastern and southern Africa. They were a diverse and successful group, a whole family of our ancient relatives, not a single simple link in a chain. The most famous of all is a single partial skeleton, discovered in the Afar region of Ethiopia in 1974. Her discoverers named her Lucy. She belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis, and she lived around 3.2 million years ago. Her skeleton is one of the most important fossils ever found, because it provides undeniable proof that our ancestors were fully committed to walking upright long before they developed large brains or made stone tools. Her anatomy is a beautiful mosaic of ancient and modern traits. Her pelvis is short and bowl-shaped, like a human's, a clear adaptation for balancing the torso during bipedal walking. Her knee joint and the angle of her femur show that she could lock her legs straight, allowing her to stand and walk with an efficient, striding gait. But her arms were still long and powerful, and her finger and toe bones were curved, like those of a chimpanzee. This tells us that she was still an adept and powerful climber. Lucy and her kind lived a life of duality, a life spent both walking on the ground during the day to forage for food, and likely retreating to the safety of the trees at night to sleep, away from the saber-toothed cats and hyenas that prowled the darkness. And we know she was not alone. In Lake Toli, Tanzania, another discovery of breathtaking significance was made, preserved in a layer of ancient, hardened volcanic ash. A set of footprints was found, dating back 3.6 million years. These were the Laetoli footprints. They show 2, perhaps 3, of our Australopithecus afarensis ancestors walking together across a damp, ashen plain. Their prints are unmistakably human-like, with a clear arch and a forward-pointing big toe. It is a single, frozen moment in time, a poignant and powerful testament to our deep past, a record of our ancestors walking together across a long-vanished world. This successful group of upright apes diversified into many forms. There were the gracile forms, like Lucy, and there were the robust forms, like Paranthropus, which had enormous, dish-shaped faces, immense molar teeth, and a great bony crest on the top of their skulls for anchoring massive chewing muscles. Adaptations for a diet of tough, fibrous, low-quality vegetation. And at some point, during this time, a new and revolutionary behavior appeared. Around 3.3 million years ago, we find the first, simple stone tools. These are not the sophisticated hand axes of later humans, but simple, battered cobbles and sharp-edged flakes, used for cracking open nuts or stripping meat from bones. This was the dawn of technology, the first, faint glimmer of the ingenuity that would one day define our lineage. And as the Pliocene gave way to the Pleistocene, and the great ice ages began in earnest, the relentless climatic instability created a powerful selective pressure for an even more adaptable, intelligent, and resourceful hominin. The Australopithecines faded away, and in their place, the first members of our own genus appeared. Around 2.4 million years ago, we see the emergence of Homo habilis, the handyman. This creature was still, in many ways, very ape-like. It had long arms and a projecting lower face, but its brain was significantly larger than that of Lucy and her kin, and its teeth were smaller and more delicate. But its most important and defining feature was not in its body, but in its behavior. Homo habilis was the first of our ancestors to consistently and systematically create and use stone tools. This was not just the simple act of using a rock to smash a nut. This was a true technology. It involved selecting the right kind of stone, understanding its fracture properties, and using another stone, a hammerstone, to strike it at the perfect angle to shear off a sharp-edged flake. These simple tools, the choppers and flakes of the Oldowan tradition, were a revolutionary invention. They were, in a very real sense, an externalization of evolution. A creature that could not evolve sharp claws or powerful canine teeth could now, with a few moments of clever work, create a cutting edge sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. These tools were a portable butcher's kit. They allowed Homo habilis to slice through tough hides and cut meat from the bones of carcasses left behind by the great saber-toothed cats, giving them access to a new, incredibly rich source of calories and protein that would in turn fuel the growth of an even larger and more energy-hungry brain. The constant pressure of the fluctuating Ice Age climate continued to drive our lineage's evolution. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new and profoundly different kind of human appeared on the African savanna. This was Homo erectus, the upright man, and with its appearance, the story of human evolution truly accelerates. Homo erectus was a revolutionary creature. Its body was tall, slender, and almost identical in its proportions to our own. The long arms of its ancestors were gone, replaced by long, powerful legs, perfectly adapted for striding and, crucially, for long-distance running. Its brain was far larger than that of Homo habilis, and its face was more human-like, with a smaller jaw and a projecting nose for cooling and moistening the dry savanna air. The famous Turkana boy skeleton, a nearly complete fossil of a young Homo erectus from Kenya, shows a creature that was, from the neck down, almost indistinguishable from a modern human. And with this new body came two new and world-altering technologies. The first was a more sophisticated toolkit. Homo erectus created the iconic tool of the early Stone Age, the Acheulean hand axe. Unlike the simple Oldowan choppers, a hand axe was a complex and symmetrical object, a beautiful, teardrop-shaped tool that was worked on both sides. To create one required skill, patience, and most importantly, the ability to hold a complex, three-dimensional design in one's mind, and then impose that design upon a block of stone. It was a sign of a new and more advanced cognitive world. The second, and even more profound, of their innovations was the mastery of fire. While earlier hominins may have used fire opportunistically, Homo erectus was the first to truly control it. The evidence is ancient, but clear. Hearths, burned bones, and fire-hardened tools begin to appear in the archaeological record. The mastery of fire was perhaps the single most important step in our journey to becoming human. It provided warmth in the cold nights of the Ice Age. It provided a powerful defense against the great predators of the Pleistocene. It transformed the night from a time of terror into a time of social gathering, and most importantly, it allowed our ancestors to cook their food. Cooking meat and tubers makes them easier to digest and unlocks far more calories and nutrients, which in turn would have fueled the continued expansion of the energy-hungry human brain. Armed with these new tools, a more adaptable body, and the power of fire, Homo erectus did something no hominin had ever done before. It walked out of Africa. For the first time, our ancestors began to spread across the entire Old World. They moved into the Middle East, across the plains of Asia, where they are known as Peking Man and Java Man, and into the challenging temperate woodlands of Europe. This was the first great human migration, a testament to the incredible adaptability of this new kind of human, an ancestor who was no longer just a clever African ape, but a true world-traveling journeyman. And as they spread, the relentless pressure of the Ice Ages would continue to forge the human mind, leading to the rise of two of the most intelligent and sophisticated hominins of all time, the Neanderthals in Europe and Asia, and our own species, Homo sapiens, in Africa, setting the stage for a great and final encounter that would determine the ultimate fate of the human lineage. The world of the Middle Pleistocene, which began around 780,000 years ago, was a world in the grip of the most intense glacial cycles of the last 66 million years. The slow, predictable wobbles in the Earth's orbit around the Sun now conspired to create long and punishing ice ages, punctuated by brief, warm interglacial periods. During a glacial maximum, the planet was a profoundly different place. Colossal ice sheets, kilometers thick, smothered the northern continents. The The Laurentide ice sheet covered all of modern-day Canada and stretched south to where New York City now stands. In Europe, the Scandinavian ice sheet covered the British Isles and all of northern Europe. So much of the world's water was locked up in these glaciers that global sea levels fell by over 120 meters, creating vast new areas of land and altering the shape of the continents. The world beyond the ice was a cold, dry, and windswept place, a vast, treeless biome known as the Mammoth Steppe, which stretched from Western Europe all the way across Asia and over the vast exposed land bridge of Beringia into North America. It was in this challenging and unforgiving world that the descendants of Homo erectus continued to evolve. In Europe and the Middle East, a new and highly specialized kind of human emerged, a creature perfectly and beautifully adapted to a life in the cold. These were the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, were the undisputed masters of Ice Age Eurasia. Their very bodies were a testament to their profound adaptation to a cold and brutal environment. They were shorter and far more robustly built than modern humans, with wide, barrel-shaped chests and short, powerful limbs, a body plan that conserved heat with incredible efficiency. Their bones were incredibly thick, their bodies powerfully muscled, the skeletons of natural powerlifters, a physique necessary for a life of close-quarters hunting of giant and dangerous Ice Age beasts. Their skulls were also distinct, long and low, with a prominent brow ridge and a large, projecting nose that was likely filled with a complex network of blood vessels, a biological radiator designed to warm and moisten the frigid, dry air of the Ice Age before it reached their lungs. And within that long skull was a brain that was, on average, even larger than our own. The Neanderthals were not the brutish, hunched-over cavemen of old cartoons. They were a different, highly intelligent, and incredibly successful form of humanity. Their intelligence is written in the stone tools they left behind. The Neanderthals were masters of a sophisticated tool-making technology known as the Mousterian tradition. This was a significant leap beyond the simple hand axes of their ancestors. It involved a complex and abstract process of preparing a core of flint, carefully shaping it before striking off a final, perfectly formed flake that would be used as a spear point or a cutting tool. This technique, known as the levelose technique, required foresight, planning, and a deep understanding of the properties of stone. They were also formidable hunters. Isotopic analysis of their bones shows that they were top-level carnivores, their diet consisting almost entirely of the meat of the great megafauna of the Ice Age. They hunted woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant cave bears, and vast herds of bison and reindeer. And because their tools were designed for thrusting, not throwing, they had to hunt these immense and dangerous animals up close. A life of incredible bravery and constant, brutal physical risk. But perhaps the most profound evidence of their humanity is found in the way they lived and the way they died. We have found the fossilized remains of old Neanderthals, individuals who had suffered debilitating injuries like withered arms or crippling arthritis, yet who lived on for years, long after they would have been able to fend for themselves. This is a clear and poignant sign that they were cared for by their social group, that they were looked after and fed, a testament to a deep and powerful sense of empathy and community. And we know that they buried their dead. In caves across Europe and the Middle East, we have found Neanderthal skeletons that were deliberately and carefully placed in graves, some in a sleeping posture, some accompanied by simple grave goods like stone tools or animal bones. This act of intentional burial suggests something more than just the disposal of a body. It suggests ritual, it suggests grief, and it suggests the first, faint glimmerings of a spiritual or symbolic thought, a recognition that death was a profound and significant event. They were not just intelligent animals, they were a people, with a rich and complex culture of their own. While the Neanderthals were reigning in the cold north, a different story was unfolding on the continent where our journey began, Africa. In the vast and fluctuating savannas of their ancestral homeland, a new kind of human was emerging from the lineage of Homo heidelbergensis. This was us, anatomically modern, Homo sapiens, the earliest fossils of our own species, from sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, date back to around 300,000 years ago. These early humans had the high, rounded skull, the small flat face, and the prominent chin that defines our own anatomy. But for a long time, their behavior remained much the same as their ancestors. Then, beginning around 100,000 years ago, something new and revolutionary began to appear in the African archaeological record. This was the dawn of behavioral modernity. We see the creation of new and more sophisticated stone tools, long, slender blades that were more efficient and versatile than anything that had come before. We see the first evidence of long-distance trade, with seashells being transported for hundreds of kilometers inland. And most importantly, we see the first undeniable evidence of art and symbolic thought. In caves like Blombos in South Africa, our ancestors began to engrave abstract, geometric patterns onto pieces of red ochre. They began to drill holes in small seashells, stringing them together to create the world's first jewelry, the first personal ornaments. This was not just a technological revolution. It was a cognitive one. It was the birth of the modern human mind, a mind that was not just concerned with the practicalities of survival, but was now capable of abstract thought, of creating and sharing symbols, and of building a complex cultural world. This new cognitive toolkit, likely facilitated by the full development of complex grammatical language, was our species' greatest weapon, the key to our eventual and total conquest of the planet. And around 60,000 years ago, armed with this new and powerful mind, our ancestors began their final and successful great migration out of Africa. They spread first into the Middle East, and then across Asia and into Europe. And in Europe, for the first time in history, they came face to face with another, different kind of intelligent, tool-making, fire-wielding human. They met the Neanderthals. For perhaps 10,000 years, these two great human lineages, the children of the ice and the children of the sun, shared the continent of Europe. What was this encounter like? The evidence is sparse, but tantalizing. We know that they lived in the same landscapes, hunted the same animals, and sometimes even used the same caves, though perhaps at different times. But the most profound evidence of their interaction is written in our own DNA. Genetic analysis has revealed that all modern humans of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This is undeniable proof that our ancestors and the Neanderthals met, and that they interbred. We are, in a small but significant way, their living descendants. But this encounter also marks the beginning of the Neanderthals' end. Around 40,000 years ago, after a reign of nearly 500,000 years, they vanished from the fossil record. Why they disappeared, while we survived, is one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution. It was likely not a single simple event, but a complex combination of factors. The climate of the last ice age was becoming even more unstable, and the more adaptable, technologically innovative Homo sapiens, with their wider social networks, may have been better equipped to handle the changes. Or perhaps our ancestors, with a higher birth rate and a more efficient way of life, simply outcompeted their cousins for the scarce resources of Ice Age Europe. Or it may be that they were not so much extinguished as they were absorbed, their small populations slowly interbreeding with the larger incoming populations of modern humans until they faded into our own lineage. Whatever the cause, by 40,000 years ago, our species was now the last human on Earth. The world we now enter is the world of the last glacial maximum, the peak of the last great ice age, which occurred around 20,000 years ago. It is a world of almost unimaginable cold and ice. Colossal glaciers, kilometers thick, now cover the northern continents at their greatest extent. The Great Laurentide ice sheet smothers all of what is now Canada and stretches south to where New York City now stands. In Europe, the Scandinavian ice sheet covers all of northern Europe. The air is brutally cold, dry and filled with a constant scouring wind that picks up dust from the vast barren plains left behind by the retreating glaciers. This is the world of the mammoth steppe, a cold, windswept, and treeless grassland that stretches from the shores of the Atlantic in France all the way across Eurasia and over the vast exposed land bridge of Beringia into North America. It was in this incredibly challenging and unforgiving environment that our own ancestors, the modern humans, who had recently arrived in Europe, did something that no creature on Earth had ever done before. They began to create art. This was not the simple, abstract scratching of their African ancestors. This was the beginning of a true artistic and symbolic explosion, a revolution of the mind. Deep within the limestone caves of what are now France and Spain, these Ice Age hunters, the people of the Upper Paleolithic, began to create some of the most beautiful, powerful, and mysterious art in the entire history of humanity. Let us imagine journeying with them. We leave the cold, bright, windswept world of the steppe and enter the absolute darkness and silence of a deep cave. With only the flickering, sputtering light of a lamp burning animal fat, we move deeper and deeper into the earth, through narrow passages and into great, vaulted chambers. And here, on the walls of these deep, sacred spaces, the world of the Ice Age is brought to life, using charcoal from burned wood for their black lines, and rich, ground-up mineral pigments, the red and yellow ochres, for their colors. They painted a magnificent and vibrant menagerie of the great beasts they shared the world with. There are great, galloping herds of wild horses, powerful, shaggy-maned cave lions, woolly rhinos, with their heads lowered as if to charge, and immense, majestic woolly mammoths, their curved tusks sweeping across the rock. The artists were masters of their craft. They used the natural, curving contours of the cave walls to give their paintings a stunning, three-dimensional quality, making the animals seem to bulge with muscle and life in the flickering lamplight. Why did they create this magnificent art in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the caves, in places they did not live? We will never know for sure, but it was clearly not for simple decoration. Perhaps it was a form of hunting magic, an attempt to capture the spirit of the animals they needed to hunt to survive. Perhaps these were sacred spaces, the first great cathedrals of humanity, where shamans would journey deep into the earth to connect with the spirit world. Or perhaps it was simply for storytelling, a way to record the great myths and histories of their people, a visual library in the heart of the earth. And their creativity was not confined to the cave walls. They also created beautiful and intricate portable art. They carved exquisite, lifelike sculptures of animals from mammoth ivory and reindeer antler, and they sculpted the famous Venus figurines, small, stylized statues of female figures, which have been found from France to Siberia, a testament to a shared cultural and perhaps spiritual world that stretched across the entire continent. And we know they had music. From these same caves, archaeologists have found beautifully crafted flutes made from the hollow bones of vultures, instruments that when played today still produce clear, haunting, and beautiful notes. This was a world of art, of music, of ritual, and of profound symbolic thought. This was the true and final dawn of the human spirit. And armed with this new, creative, and cooperative mind, our ancestors now completed their conquest of the planet. Around 65,000 years ago, they had already accomplished one of the most remarkable feats of exploration in human history. Using simple rafts or canoes, they had crossed the open ocean to reach the continent of Australia, becoming the first humans to ever set foot on that new world. And now, at the height of the last glacial maximum, they embarked on their final great migration. With so much of the world's water locked up in the great ice sheets, the sea level was low enough to expose a vast, cold, and dry land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska. This was Beringia, and sometime between 20 and 15,000 years ago, small groups of Ice Age hunters, following the great herds of mammoth, bison, and horses, walked across this land bridge and into the Americas. They were the first people to ever enter this new hemisphere. From there, they spread south through an ice-free corridor that opened between the great glaciers and into the heart of a continent that was filled with its own magnificent megafauna and was for a time a true hunter's paradise. Then, beginning around 14,000 years ago, the world began to change, rapidly and dramatically. The great orbital cycles shifted. and the planet began to warm. The ice ages came to a sudden and violent end. The colossal ice sheets, which had dominated the northern hemisphere for 100,000 years, began to melt at a catastrophic rate. The meltwater created colossal, continent-sized glacial lakes, which would periodically burst through their ice dams, unleashing biblical-scale floods that scoured the landscape. Sea levels rose by over 100 meters, drowning the coastal plains and severing the land bridges, turning Britain into an island and closing the door to the Americas behind its first peoples. The cold, dry mammoth steppe was replaced by the temperate, wet, and dense forests and prairies that we know today. And in the wake of this great, global thaw, one final, great extinction event took place. This was the Quaternary extinction event, the great death of the megafauna across the globe, but most dramatically, in the Americas, the great beasts of the Ice Age vanished forever. The woolly mammoth and the woolly rhino disappeared from the plains of Eurasia and North America. The great shaggy cave bears and the fierce cave lions vanished from Europe. The iconic saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, the great ambush hunter, disappeared from the Americas. The colossal giant ground sloths, the tank-like glyptodonts, and the Native American horses and camels all went extinct. Why did they die? The debate continues to this day, but it was likely a devastating 1-2 punch. The first blow was the rapid and extreme climate change. The habitats that these great animals were perfectly adapted to, the cold, dry mammoth steppe, disappeared in the space of just a few thousand years, replaced by dense forests that they could not navigate or feed in. But the second blow may have been us. This great extinction event coincides perfectly with the arrival and spread of a new, incredibly intelligent, and deadly predator into these ecosystems, Homo sapiens. Armed with the sophisticated spear thrower, the atlatl, which allowed them to hunt from a safe distance, and working in large cooperative groups, our ancestors were formidable hunters. The great megafauna, which had never before faced a predator with such a deadly combination of intelligence and technology, may have been hunted to extinction. And so, the Pleistocene epoch ends not with a bang, but with a great and final silence. The world at the dawn of our own current epoch, the Holocene, 10,000 years ago, is a world that has been emptied. Once again, the great ice sheets are gone, and the magnificent megafauna, the mammoths, the saber-tooths, and the ground sloths are gone too. And on this new, warmer, and more stable planet, our own species, Homo sapiens, is now the undisputed and dominant large animal, the sole inheritor of a world that we had, perhaps, helped to empty. And with the great beasts gone, and the climate now stable and warm, our ancestors were on the verge of the single most important innovation in human history, an invention that would change our relationship with the planet forever: agriculture. This would set the stage for the Neolithic Revolution, the dawn of human civilization, and the beginning of recorded history. The world at the dawn of our own epoch, the Holocene, some 11,700 years ago, was a world of incredible abundance and opportunity. The immense, grinding ice sheets that had held the northern hemisphere in their grip for 100,000 years were in their final, catastrophic retreat. As they melted, they filled the great basins they had carved, creating the Great Lakes of North America and the Baltic Sea of Europe. The vast, cold, and dusty mammoth steppe was gone, replaced by the return of immense temperate forests of oak, birch, and pine that spread across the continents. Global sea levels, which had been dramatically lowered by the ice, now rose, flooding the continental shelves and creating the familiar coastlines that we know today. In this new, warmer, wetter, and more stable world, our ancestors, the last hunter-gatherers, flourished. For a few thousand years, they lived in a kind of paradise. The rivers were teeming with fish, the forests were filled with deer and wild boar, and the air was alive with vast flocks of birds. They lived in small nomadic bands, moving with the seasons, their lives governed by an incredibly deep and intimate knowledge of the natural world. For 99% of our species' history, this was our way of life. It was a successful, adaptable, and resilient culture that had allowed us to survive the worst of the ice ages and to populate every corner of the planet. There was no obvious reason to change. But around 12,000 years ago, in a region of the Middle East known as the Fertile Crescent. A slow and almost imperceptible revolution began. This was not a sudden invention, but a gradual, multi-generational process of profound transformation. The people of this region, the Natufians, began to experiment with a new way of life. They lived in a land that was particularly rich in resources, including vast, wild fields of the ancestors of modern wheat and barley, and herds of wild goats, sheep, and pigs. They began to settle down, building the first permanent villages of stone huts, and harvesting these wild grains as a reliable food source. Over many centuries, a process of coevolution began. These early people would have naturally collected the seeds from the plants that were the most useful, those with the largest grains, or those whose seeds clung most tightly to the stalk instead of shattering on the ground. By preferentially harvesting these plants, and by spilling their seeds around their settlements, they were, unconsciously at first, acting as agents of natural selection. They were slowly, generation by generation, transforming these wild grasses into domesticated crops. At the same time, they began to manage the wild herds of goats and sheep, culling the aggressive individuals and protecting the more docile ones, slowly transforming these wild animals into domesticated livestock. This was the dawn of agriculture. This revolution did not happen just once. In a remarkable testament to human ingenuity, it was an idea that was independently invented in at least 7 different parts of the world, with different local plants and animals. In the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys of China, people began to cultivate wild rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, they domesticated maize, beans, and squash. In the Andes of South America, they cultivated potatoes and llamas. In sub-Saharan Africa, they domesticated sorghum and yams. This was the single most important transformation in the entire history of our species. The shift from a nomadic life of hunting and gathering to a settled life of farming would change our relationship with the planet and with each other forever. The agricultural revolution was not an easy transition. Early farmers likely worked harder, had a less varied and less nutritious diet, and suffered from new diseases, but it had one profound and world-altering consequence. It allowed for the production of a surplus of food, and from this surplus, all the complexity of our modern world would grow. A stable and abundant food supply led to an unprecedented explosion in the human population. The small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers were replaced by large, dense, and growing farming villages, and with this new, settled way of life came a host of new technologies. People began to create pottery to store their surplus grain and water. They developed polished stone axes for clearing the great forests for their fields, and they invented the loom to weave textiles from domesticated plant fibers and animal wool. But this new world also created new problems and new social structures. For the first time, the concept of property became central to human life. A hunter-gatherer owns only what they can carry. A farmer owns a field, a house, a harvest, and a herd. With property came the idea of wealth, of inheritance, and of inequality. And with dense, settled populations living in close and often unsanitary proximity to their domesticated animals, a new and terrible threat emerged: infectious crowd diseases. Pathogens that had once been confined to animals now made the leap to humans, evolving into the devastating diseases of measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, and influenza that would plague human civilizations for millennia. As villages grew larger and societies became more complex, a new form of social organization was required, and around 6,000 years ago, in the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the first true cities were born. This was the beginning of the Sumerian civilization. Here, for the first time, we see the emergence of a centralized government with kings and a ruling class. We see the construction of monumental architecture, the great temple ziggurats, dedicated to a pantheon of gods and managed by a powerful priestly class. We see the formation of the first armies, the first systems of taxation, and the first complex, long-distance trade networks. And to manage the incredible complexity of this new urban world, to keep track of the tribute of grain in the temple storehouses. The Sumerians invented one final and most profound technology. They invented writing. The first writing, cuneiform, was essentially a form of accounting, a way to record bushels of barley and heads of cattle. But this simple act of scratching marks onto a clay tablet was the moment that we, as a species, crossed the final great threshold. It was the moment we stepped out of the vast, silent, and unrecorded depths of prehistory and into the shallow, noisy, and brightly lit waters of recorded history. We have now crossed the great threshold from the unwritten depths of prehistory into the world of recorded history. With the invention of writing, our own species began to create a new kind of fossil record, a record of thought preserved in symbol. For the first time on this planet, a creature began to consciously record its own history, its laws, its myths, and its memories. This is the world of history, a story that is, by the standards of our long journey, incredibly young. The entirety of recorded human history, from the first Sumerian clay tablets to the words you are hearing now, spans a mere 5,000 years. It is a brief, bright, and noisy moment, but the world it is built upon is ancient, silent, and immeasurably deep. To truly understand our place in the Cenozoic, we must see our own time for what it is, the very newest, thinnest layer of a vast and ancient geology of life. The story of our world is like an immense library filled with millions of volumes that tell the tale of every epoch and every era. The story of our own civilizations is but a single, recently written page in the final book of the final volume. And all that came before, the immense, silent volumes that tell the tale of the mammals, the dinosaurs, and the first simple cells, is the foundation upon which our own small story rests. Let us reflect, for a moment, on the profound inheritance that is written into our very being. The iron in your blood, which carries oxygen to your cells, was forged in the heart of a colossal, long-dead star that exploded billions of years ago, seeding the nebula from which our solar system was born. The water that makes up the majority of your body is the same ancient water that once fell in a million-year deluge to form the primordial oceans. The complex, eukaryotic cells that form your tissues are the product of a 2 billion-year-old act of symbiosis, a great merger between ancient microbes that created the mitochondrial engines that power your every thought and every breath. Your own body plan, the bilateral symmetry, the head, the spinal cord, is a blueprint that was first laid down in a humble worm-like creature that swam in the seas of the Cambrian explosion over 500 million years ago. The very bones of your hand are a modification of the fin bones of a lobe-finned fish, like Tiktaalik, that used them to prop itself up in the shallows of a Devonian swamp. And the amniotic egg, the private ocean that freed our vertebrate ancestors from the water, is the same fundamental technology that in a modified form allowed you to grow safely within your own mother. The 66 million year story of the Cenozoic is simply the most recent chapter of this unbroken thread. The great cataclysm that ended the age of dinosaurs was not just an extinction, it was the great enabling event of our own world. The fall of that ancient empire was the necessary precondition for the rise of our own. Without that random cosmic accident, our small, shrew-like ancestors would have likely remained in the shadows, and the world we know today, the age of mammals, would never have been born. The journey we have just taken through the 66 million years of the Cenozoic is the direct story of our own origins. The world we inhabit today, in its entirety, was forged in the fires of this era. The very shape of our continents, the positions of our oceans, the height of our mountain ranges, like the Himalayas, the Alps, and the Andes, are all the product of the slow, relentless continental drift of the Cenozoic. The world was given its modern face during our age. The climate we experience, this unique icehouse state with its polar ice caps and its temperate seasons, is the direct legacy of the great cooling event that began when Antarctica became isolated. The great forests, and most importantly, the vast grasslands that feed our civilizations, are all products of this cooler, more seasonal world. Every wild mammal on Earth today, from the great blue whale to the smallest field mouse, is a product of the explosive evolutionary radiation that we have just explored. They are our cousins, fellow survivors of the Great Extinction, fellow inheritors of the Cenozoic world, and our own story. The story of humanity is perhaps the most profound legacy of all. We are the children of the Cenozoic. Our primate lineage was born in the hothouse jungles of the Eocene. Our defining trait, our bipedalism, was a response to the shrinking of those forests and the spread of the Miocene savannas. And our greatest asset, our large, creative, and problem-solving brain, was forged in the relentless, unforgiving crucible of the Pleistocene ice ages. We are not an exception to the story of the Cenozoic. We are its ultimate and most unlikely expression. And so, our long and epic journey through the deep and silent corridors of time comes to its final, peaceful conclusion. We have traveled from the birth of a molten earth to the first spark of life. We have witnessed the poisoning and the greening of a planet. We have explored the strange, alien forms of the first animals and walked through the great coal swamps of the Carboniferous. We have survived the great dying, the greatest extinction of all time. We have spent 165 million years in the majestic, awe-inspiring, and terrifying world of the dinosaurs, a world that was their empire. We have watched their world flourish, and we have borne silent witness to its fiery and cataclysmic end. And we have seen, in the quiet dawn that followed, the rise of our own mammalian ancestors and the enduring living legacy of the dinosaurs themselves. The story of the dinosaurs is a profound and humbling lesson in the nature of life on Earth. It is a story of incredible success and of catastrophic chance. It is a reminder that no reign, no matter how long or how mighty, is eternal. But it is also, and most importantly, a story of connection. The fall of the great dinosaurs was the single most important event that made our own world, the age of mammals, possible. Their story is the great and tragic preface to our own. The history of life on this planet is a single, immense, and unbroken thread. It connects the atoms in our bodies to the hearts of long-dead stars. It connects the very cells that power us to ancient microbes that were engulfed in a symbiotic partnership 2 billion years ago. And it connects us, the quiet inheritors of a fallen world, to the last mighty triceratops that ever walked the earth. As you now drift into a deep and final, peaceful sleep, may you feel the quiet wonder of that immense, unbroken story, and your own small but precious place within it. The world of the Ice Age was not a single, uniform landscape of ice and snow. It was a complex and varied planet, and its story was different on every continent. While the great ice sheets of the northern hemisphere advanced and retreated, shaping the destinies of the mammoths and the early humans, the great southern continents, isolated by the relentless drift of the tectonic plates, were engaged in their own unique evolutionary dramas. For tens of millions of years, South America and Australia were giant, living laboratories, worlds where life, cut off from the rest of the planet, evolved into a menagerie of strange and wonderful forms, a testament to the incredible creative power of evolution when left to its own devices. Let us first travel to the island continent of South America. For nearly 60 million years, it had been an isolated world, and in this splendid isolation, a unique and archaic fauna had survived and thrived. The role of the apex predator was held not by a placental mammal, but by a living echo of the dinosaurian age. These were the forest hatsids, the terror birds. These giant, flightless, carnivorous birds were the undisputed kings of the South American savanna for millions of years. A creature like the mighty Kelenken from the Miocene was a formidable and terrifying hunter. It stood up to 3 meters, or 10 feet, tall, making it the largest predatory bird of all time. It could not fly, but its long, powerful legs were built for running down prey with incredible speed across the open plains. Its most devastating weapon was its head. It had a massive, eagle-like skull, over 2 feet long, and at the end of it was a huge, hooked, and razor-sharp beak. It would have used this beak not for slicing, but like a biological pickaxe, striking downwards with the immense power of its neck muscles to deliver a single, devastating, and fatal blow to its victims. Beneath them, a strange and wonderful menagerie of native hoofed herbivores evolved, filling the niches that would be occupied by deer, horses, and antelope on other continents. There were the Litopterns, a group of long-legged runners, their most famous member, which survived long enough to be seen by the first humans in South America, was the bizarre Macrauchenia. It looked like a camel, with the legs of a rhino and a long, graceful neck. Its most peculiar feature was that its nasal opening was on the top of its head, suggesting it possessed a short, flexible trunk, like that of a tapir. There were also the Notungulates, an incredibly diverse group that evolved into forms resembling everything from rabbits to rhinos. The most famous was the mighty Toxodon, a creature the size of a black rhino, with a broad, hippo-like head and powerful, squat limbs. And preying on these strange herbivores were not just the terror birds, but also a unique dynasty of marsupial predators. In a stunning example of convergent evolution, they evolved a creature that looked and acted almost exactly like the saber-toothed cats of the north. This was Thylacis melis, the marsupial saber-tooth. It was a powerful, jaguar-sized predator with a pair of colossal, ever-growing canine teeth. To protect these enormous teeth, it had evolved a pair of unique bony flanges that grew down from its lower jaw, a scabbard of bone for its saber-like weapons. If South America was a strange and unique world, Australia was even more so. Its even greater and more prolonged isolation meant that it became a world almost entirely dominated by a single group of mammals, the marsupials. Having arrived on the continent before it was fully separated, the marsupials radiated into every available ecological niche, producing a spectacular and unique megafauna of their own. The role of the giant herbivore was filled by creatures like Diprotodon, the marsupial rhino. This was the largest marsupial of all time, a wombat the size of a hippopotamus, a slow-moving, powerful grazer that roamed the open woodlands of Ice Age Australia in great herds. There were also the giant, short-faced kangaroos, like Procoptodon, which stood over 2 meters tall and was far more robustly built than any kangaroo today. Its single large toe on each foot suggests it could not hop, but instead walked bipedally, like a person. And the role of the apex predator was filled by one of the most remarkable and specialized mammalian carnivores of all time, Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. Though not a true cat, it was a predator of incredible power. It had a robust, lion-like body, and its forelimbs were immensely powerful, tipped with a huge, retractable, cat-like claw on each thumb, which it would have used to hold on to its struggling prey. But its most terrifying feature was its teeth. Instead of saber-like canines, its killing teeth were a pair of huge, blade-like premolars, which acted like a pair of enormous, flesh-cutting bolt cutters, giving it a bite of incredible shearing power. And Australia was not just a land of strange mammals, it was also home to its own reptilian giants, including a colossal, 7-meter-long goanna called Megalania, and a giant, terrestrial crocodile called Quincana. For tens of millions of years, these isolated worlds flourished, but their splendid isolation was not destined to last forever. Around 3 million years ago, the great geological forces of plate tectonics pushed the Isthmus of Panama up from the sea, creating a land bridge that connected North and South America for the first time in an eternity. This initiated the Great American Biotic Interchange. What followed was a great continental-scale biological invasion. The highly evolved and competitive placental mammals from the north, the great saber-toothed cats, the wolves, the bears, the horses, the camels, and the elephants, streamed southwards across this new land bridge. The competition was not an equal one. The northern invaders, having been forged in the crucible of a much larger and more competitive continental ecosystem, were devastatingly effective. The great terror birds, the strange native ungulates, and the marsupial saber-tooths of South America could not compete with this new wave of highly efficient predators and grazers. Within a few million years, the unique ancient fauna of South America had been almost completely replaced. Australia's isolation, however, continued until the arrival of a new and unprecedented kind of invasive species between 65 and 50,000 years ago, the first humans, and shortly after their arrival, the great megafauna of Australia, the giant kangaroos, the diprotodons, and the marsupial lions, vanished forever in an extinction event that mirrors the disappearance of the megafauna in the Americas at the end of the last ice age. And what of the third great southern continent, Antarctica? By the time the ice ages began, it had long been in its polar position and was already covered by a vast and permanent ice sheet. It was a world of profound and silent cold, but it was not lifeless. Along its coastlines, and in the incredibly rich and productive waters of the Southern Ocean that surrounded it, the ancestors of our modern penguins, seals, and great whales thrived, a unique and resilient ecosystem adapted to the most extreme cold on the planet. These lost worlds are a poignant reminder of the creative power of evolution and of the fragility of isolated ecosystems. They are the great parallel stories of the age of mammals, a testament to the fact that our own history is not the only one that was written on the face of the Cenozoic Earth. But the world of the Ice Age was a world of profound and constant change, and nowhere was this change more powerful or more consequential than in the great global ocean. While our attention is often drawn to the colossal glaciers grinding across the continents and the great shaggy megafauna that roamed the mammoth steppe, it was the ocean that acted as the true engine and the deep, cold memory of the planet's climate. The same forces that built the ice sheets on the land were simultaneously orchestrating a vast and dramatic transformation beneath the waves, creating a marine world that was, in many ways, as alien and as dynamic as the frozen landscapes on the continents. The most profound of these changes was the great and rhythmic pulse of the sea level itself, as the great glacial cycles, driven by the patient, cosmic clockwork of the Milankovitch cycles, plunged the world into deep freezes. Colossal quantities of water were drawn from the oceans and locked away in the growing continental ice sheets. With each great glaciation, the sea level of the entire planet would fall, slowly but inexorably. At the peak of the last glacial maximum, some 20,000 years ago, the global sea level stood more than 120 meters, or 400 feet, lower than it does today. This was not a subtle change. It was a complete redrawing of the map of the world. Vast, shallow continental shelves, which are today submerged hundreds of feet beneath the waves, were then exposed as broad, coastal plains. A great green land bridge, Doggerland, connected the British Isles to mainland Europe. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were joined into a single, larger continent called Sohul. And most consequentially of all, for the story of life, a vast, cold and dry land bridge, Beringia, connected Siberia to Alaska, creating a highway between the old world and the new. This was a world of different coastlines, of different connections, and of different possibilities. Then, as the great orbital cycles shifted once more, and the planet began to warm, the ice sheets would melt, and this immense volume of stored water would be released back into the oceans in a series of great, catastrophic meltwater pulses, causing the sea levels to rise with a speed that would have been perceptible over the course of a single human lifetime, drowning the coastal plains and severing the land bridges once more. This great, cyclical breathing of the oceans, this advance and retreat of the shorelines, was accompanied by a dramatic reorganization of the ocean currents themselves. The great ocean conveyor belt, the thermohaline circulation that transports heat from the equator to the poles, was profoundly affected by the cycles of ice. As the great Laurentide ice sheet melted, it would periodically release vast armadas of icebergs and torrents of cold, fresh water into the North Atlantic. This sudden influx of fresh water, being less dense than the salty ocean water, would form a lid on the surface of the sea, preventing the warm, salty water of the conveyor belt from sinking and effectively shutting down the great current. This would plunge Europe and North America back into a sudden and deep freeze, an abrupt climatic spasm like the Younger Dryas event, even as the rest of the world was warming. The Ice Age was not a smooth and steady process. but a chaotic and often violent series of fits and starts, all orchestrated by the delicate and complex dance between the ice on the land and the water in the sea. And in these new, colder, and more productive Ice Age oceans, a new dynasty of marine life rose to a position of global dominance. The great cataclysm that ended the age of dinosaurs had wiped out the magnificent marine reptiles, the mosasaurs, and the plesiosaurs. After a long period of recovery and the brief reign of the colossal sharks like Megalodon, the Cenozoic oceans were now, finally, and definitively, the age of whales, the cooling of the oceans, and the new powerful and nutrient-rich currents that were born from the freezing of Antarctica had created the perfect conditions for massive, seasonal blooms of krill and other small organisms. And it was this new, incredibly rich food source that fueled the evolution of the largest animals in the history of our planet, the great baleen whales, the ancestors of our modern blue whales, fin whales, and humpback whales, evolved their unique, filter-feeding baleen plates to harvest this immense bounty of krill with incredible efficiency. They became the new gentle giants of the oceans, their colossal forms a testament to the incredible richness of the cold polar seas, and alongside them, the toothed whales, the odontocetes, were perfecting the art of intelligent, cooperative hunting. The great sperm whales, with their huge complex brains, were now the masters of the deep ocean, diving to unimaginable depths to hunt giant squid, and the orca, or killer whale, with its sophisticated pack hunting strategies and its complex, learned cultural traditions, became the undisputed apex predator of the world's oceans, an animal of profound intelligence and power. The rise of the whales was accompanied by the diversification of another group of mammals that had returned to the sea, the pinnipeds, the seals, sea lions, and walruses. They were the masters of the coastlines and the sea ice. They evolved streamlined bodies for efficient swimming, but retained the ability to come ashore to rest and to breed. The great walruses of the Pleistocene, with their immense tusks, were formidable inhabitants of the Arctic, while vast colonies of seals and sea lions covered the coastlines of the world, their lives tied to the rhythmic advance and retreat of the sea ice. And in the North Pacific, a unique and gentle giant grazed in the great underwater kelp forests. This was the Steller's sea cow, a colossal, 10-ton manatee-like creature, a peaceful herbivore of the cold seas. And it was into this rich and dynamic marine world that our own ancestors first began to venture. The archaeological record shows that from a very early stage, our species, Homo sapiens, learned to live on the coastlines and to harvest the incredible bounty of the sea. We find ancient shell middens, great piles of discarded shells that are the remnants of countless meals of shellfish. We find finely crafted bone harpoons, a technology for hunting seals and large fish, and in one of the most remarkable chapters of our own story, we use this new mastery of the sea to complete our conquest of the planet. The great migration that first brought humans to the continent of Australia, some 65,000 years ago, was not a journey over land. It was a series of deliberate and courageous sea voyages, a testament to the sophisticated boat building and navigational skills of our ancient ancestors, and many scientists now believe that the peopling of the Americas may not have been a single journey over the Bering Land Bridge, but may have also involved a kelp highway, a slow coastal migration in small boats, with the first peoples living off the rich marine ecosystems of the North Pacific coast as they made their way south into a new world. The oceans of the Ice Age were not a barren, frozen wasteland. They were a dynamic, productive, and vibrant world. A world where the great whales rose to become the largest animals of all time, where seals and walruses mastered the boundary between ice and water, and where our own ancestors first learned to look to the sea not as a barrier, but as a highway and as a source of life. The cathedrals of the Ice Age. The world we now enter is the world of the last glacial maximum, the peak of the last great ice age, which occurred around 20,000 years ago. It is a world of almost unimaginable cold and ice. Colossal glaciers, kilometers thick, now cover the northern continents at their greatest extent. The Great Laurentide ice sheet smothers all of what is now Canada and stretches south to where New York City now stands. In Europe, the Scandinavian ice sheet covers all of northern Europe. The air is brutally cold, dry, and filled with a constant, scouring wind that picks up dust from the vast barren plains left behind by the retreating glaciers. This is the world of the mammoth steppe, a cold, windswept, and treeless grassland that stretches from the shores of the Atlantic in France, all the way across Eurasia, and over the vast exposed land bridge of Beringia into North America. It was in this incredibly challenging and unforgiving environment that our own ancestors, the modern humans who had recently arrived in Europe, did something that no creature on Earth had ever done before. They began to create art. This was not the simple, abstract scratching of their African ancestors. This was the beginning of a true artistic and symbolic explosion, a revolution of the mind, deep within the limestone caves of what are now France and Spain. These Ice Age hunters, the people of the Upper Paleolithic, began to create some of the most beautiful, powerful, and mysterious art in the entire history of humanity. Let us imagine journeying with them. We leave the cold, bright, windswept world of the steppe and enter the absolute darkness and silence of a deep cave, with only the flickering, sputtering light of a lamp burning animal fat. We move deeper and deeper into the earth, through narrow passages and into great vaulted chambers. And here, on the walls of these deep sacred spaces, the world of the Ice Age is brought to life, using charcoal from burned wood for their black lines, and rich, ground-up mineral pigments, the red and yellow ochres, for their colors. They painted a magnificent and vibrant menagerie of the great beasts they shared the world with. There are great, galloping herds of wild horses, powerful, shaggy-maned cave lions, woolly rhinos with their heads lowered as if to charge, and immense, majestic woolly mammoths, their curved tusks sweeping across the rock. The artists were masters of their craft. They used the natural, curving contours of the cave walls to give their paintings a stunning, three-dimensional quality, making the animals seem to bulge with muscle and life in the flickering lamplight. Why did they create this magnificent art in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the caves, in places they did not live? We will never know for sure, but it was clearly not for simple decoration. Perhaps it was a form of hunting magic, an attempt to capture the spirit of the animals they needed to hunt to survive. Perhaps these were sacred spaces, the first great cathedrals of humanity, where shamans would journey deep into the earth to connect with the spirit world. Or perhaps it was simply for storytelling, a way to record the great myths and histories of their people, a visual library in the heart of the earth. And their creativity was not confined to the cave walls. They also created beautiful and intricate portable art. They carved exquisite, lifelike sculptures of animals from mammoth ivory and reindeer antler, and they sculpted the famous Venus figurines, small, stylized statues of female figures, which have been found from France to Siberia, a testament to a shared cultural and perhaps spiritual world that stretched across the entire continent. And we know they had music. From these same caves, archaeologists have found beautifully crafted flutes made from the hollow bones of vultures, instruments that when played today still produce clear, haunting, and beautiful notes. This was a world of art, of music, of ritual, and of profound symbolic thought. This was the true and final dawn of the human spirit. And armed with this new creative and cooperative mind, our ancestors now completed their conquest of the planet. Around 65,000 years ago, they had already accomplished one of the most remarkable feats of exploration in human history. Using simple rafts or canoes, they had crossed the open ocean to reach the continent of Australia, becoming the first humans to ever set foot on that new world. And now, at the height of the last glacial maximum, they embarked on their final, great migration. With so much of the world's water locked up in the great ice sheets, the sea level was low enough to expose a vast, cold, and dry land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska. This was Beringia, and sometime between 20 and 15,000 years ago, small groups of Ice Age hunters, following the great herds of mammoth, bison, and horses, walked across this land bridge and into the Americas. They were the first people to ever enter this new hemisphere. From there, They spread south, through an ice-free corridor that opened between the great glaciers and into the heart of a continent that was filled with its own magnificent megafauna and was, for a time, a true hunter's paradise. Then, beginning around 14,000 years ago, the world began to change, rapidly and dramatically. The great orbital cycles shifted, and the planet began to warm. The ice ages came to a sudden and violent end. The colossal ice sheets, which had dominated the northern hemisphere for 100,000 years, began to melt at a catastrophic rate. The meltwater created colossal, continent-sized glacial lakes, which would periodically burst through their ice dams, unleashing biblical-scale floods that scoured the landscape. Sea levels rose by over 100 meters, drowning the coastal plains and severing the land bridges, turning Britain into an island and closing the door to the Americas behind its first peoples. The cold, dry mammoth steppe was replaced by the temperate, wet, and dense forests and prairies that we know today. And in the wake of this great global thaw, one final, great extinction event took place. This was the Quaternary extinction event, the great death of the megafauna across the globe. But most dramatically, in the Americas, the great beasts of the Ice Age vanished forever. The woolly mammoth and the woolly rhino disappeared from the plains of Eurasia and North America. The great, shaggy cave bears and the fierce cave lions vanished from Europe. The iconic saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, the great ambush hunter, disappeared from the Americas. The colossal giant ground sloths, the tank-like glyptodonts, and the Native American horses and camels all went extinct. Why did they die? The debate continues to this day, but it was likely a devastating 1-2 punch. The first blow was the rapid and extreme climate change. The habitats that these great animals were perfectly adapted to, the cold, dry mammoth steppe, disappeared in the space of just a few thousand years, replaced by dense forests that they could not navigate or feed in. But the second blow may have been us. This great extinction event coincides perfectly with the arrival and spread of a new, incredibly intelligent and deadly predator into these ecosystems, Homo sapiens. Armed with the sophisticated spear thrower, the atlatl, which allowed them to hunt from a safe distance, and working in large cooperative groups, our ancestors were formidable hunters. The great megafauna, which had never before faced a predator with such a deadly combination of intelligence and technology, may have been hunted to extinction. And so, the Pleistocene epoch ends not with a bang, but with a great and final silence. The world, at the dawn of our own current epoch, the Holocene, 10,000 years ago, is a world that has been emptied once again. The great ice sheets are gone, and the magnificent megafauna, the mammoths, the saber-tooths, and the ground sloths, are gone too. And on this new, warmer, and more stable planet, our own species, Homo sapiens, is now the undisputed and dominant large animal, the sole inheritor of a world that we had, perhaps, helped to empty. And with the great beasts gone, and the climate now stable and warm, our ancestors were on the verge of the single most important innovation in human history, an invention that would change our relationship with the planet forever: agriculture. This would set the stage for the Neolithic Revolution, the dawn of human civilization, and the beginning of recorded history.